I do not like the word toxic masculinity at all. I find that phrase reductive, and it doesn't talk about positive masculinity. It says masculinity and then with the word toxic. What do people take from that? What do young boys take from that? What do children take from that if they identify as male? I would prefer that we had a whole thing about what's positive masculinity, what's positive femininity, what's positive transgender, whatever it is, can we go for? What are the values and what is the best we're aiming for? Not just naming the bad bit, which has no context. So it's a phrase. So I think we're lazy.
My guest today has a Bachelor of Arts in English from the University of Cape Town and a Bachelor of Honours degree in Clinical Psychology from the University of South Africa, and is a member of the Australian and New Zealand Association of Psychotherapists and the Australian Association of Buddhist Counsellors and Psychotherapists. She sits on two boards, the Buttery here in the Northern Rivers, New South Wales, and the governance board of an emerging psychedelic rehabilitation program. She has previously sat on the federal government's advisory body for the prevention of youth suicide and the federal government advisory body for alcohol and drug treatment recommendations. She has been the clinical director of 3 high-end rehabilitation centres, including the world's most prestigious, the Sanctuary here in Byron Bay. Welcome, Jane Enter. Hi, Jane.
Hey, Pete. Nice to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show. I know you had your own podcast that was during the COVID years, On the Couch. Is that
Yes,
right?
yes, yeah.
Is that still going?
No, the guy who did it has moved to Cairns.
Okay. I like the title of that, On the Couch, because it's like the psychiatrist's couch.
Well, that's my office.
Yeah,
There's
right.
always a couch.
So I just thought I'd start because today, the reason I had you on, because the topic we're going to be talking about, which is quite topical at the moment, is domestic violence. It's just recently been in the media here in Australia. But before we get into it, I just thought I should put a couple of phone numbers up because if you're listening and you might find the topics of today's conversation, domestic violence and suicide, distressing, then you might want to tune out and not listen, or if you do want to listen and are left feeling upset after the conversation, then the number for the Family Violence Counselling Services in Australia is 1800 737 732, and the Lifeline hotline number is 131114. That's just to provide people somewhere to go if they need support. Okay, so I just thought maybe... I met you about 5 years ago, and we were both working at the same rehab centre here in Byron, the Sanctuary, which was, I think at the time, one of the world's most prestigious or expensive treatment centres. And you were the clinical director there, and I was just, what was my role? I was nursing there at the time, and kind of like live-in support person for the clients.
Yeah.
What I liked about that position there was that the guy who owned that company, he wasn't necessarily really good with people himself, but I thought he was really good at picking people who were good with people, and I thought the team there was exceptional. So I think his greatest talent was finding other talent, and what I liked about that role was the team, like the sense of team that we had, and it was the first time I felt like I was with a team of equals and colleagues that all were on the same page, and that our focus was really the client.
Yeah.
And I've worked in the public sector as well, and I've never really had such a sense of client-focused teamwork. That was my experience there. And you as the clinical director, you would have had something to do with that. So I just want to acknowledge that I really, enjoyed working with you as the clinical director at that institution. And so maybe, do you want to say anything about those days working back there at the Sanctuary?
Look, the client was the focus. And we were very lucky, I think, because we had a wonderful team of people who really took joy in other people getting well. And we had that in common. So it was a really good place to work in respect of that team.
Yeah, that was my experience. And then we have I'm just thinking back of some of the characters that we worked with there. When we were talking about some of them earlier, some of the psychiatrists and other therapists and even the chefs and carers and what they all have in common was, all of them, right down from the massage therapist to the cleaners and everybody. Like, we really had the client as our focus. And I think the clients felt that, and I think that had a lot to do with why they generally got well.
Yeah, I think they felt the heart of people and the genuine and sincere desire to see them have the best possible experience that we could give.
Yeah. Yeah, you've been a therapist for a long time. I'm a nurse, a counsellor, and I've also been a trauma therapist for about 10 years. And if I had to think of something that, if I had to say the one thing that gets the job done when I'm working with a client, I would say that it's the quality of the relationship that I establish with the client, rather than any technique or model or methodology or anything like that I'm using or applying. Really, for me, it is about the heart and about establishing a rapport and a therapeutic alliance with somebody, in that I genuinely want to see them get better. And if I get better in the process too, that's a bonus.
Do you know what you said about the relationship being the most important thing? There's a book that's quite old now called Making Sense of Babel, which is a book about researching all the therapeutic modalities and seeing, well, which one is superior to another. And all of them had various things that were useful. But the most important thing out of every modality was the quality of the relationship that the clinician has with the client. That was the most useful and best predictor of whether the treatment was going to be useful and of benefit.
Why do you think that is?
People, if you know someone cares about you, they're curious, they're invested, they ask the right questions, they want to know who you are, how you came to be as you are. They have a warmth and a desire to know you and to see you flourish and to find out what's difficult and how they can be of use. I think people feel that in an energetic and genuine exchange that makes them feel seen and heard and valued. And who doesn't respond to that? Yeah,
when I was doing my trauma work, what I noticed was that, my view was that it's generally people that cause the trauma. And so that when the person's having their healing, if there's a person there witnessing their healing, the healing's more real somehow. So, you can heal your trauma on your own, but if you're healing that with someone else witnessing it, it tends to embody it or anchor it more. That was just something I observed.
Look, we only exist because someone else sees us. So when you are in relationship with somebody and there's been attachment issues or hurt caused by another person, the healing milieu is that relationship and being seen and having a different experience of being attended to and, cared about.
Yeah, so being hurt by someone is, you just mentioned, when you've been hurt by someone, then you're going to go through a healing process and you need someone there to help you through that healing process. And that's kind of what's behind today's topic, domestic violence. And in domestic violence, you are being hurt by someone, and usually that's your domestic partner or spouse. And so the person who's hurting you is someone who you probably see as someone as a care provider as well. So that must cause a real conflict when the person you choose to call your life partner then becomes the person who hurts you, whether that hurt is psychological, emotional, physical, or whatever. And so the reason I wanted to talk about domestic violence today is that the federal government in Australia has announced a $1 billion strategy to combat, and I don't like that word combat, but this is the media's way of looking at it, to combat what they refer to as gender-based violence. I don't like that language either, including a $5,000 payment to women to leave their partner. That's part of the strategy. So I imagine you would have heard of this. What are your initial thoughts about the federal government's approach to splashing $1 billion of taxpayers' money, and do you think they've got it right?
Look, I want to answer this in context because to me context is everything. So domestic violence isn't just about what takes place between partners. It takes place in domestic arrangements with parents to children and sometimes siblings to siblings. And when you said it must be very difficult for someone to love someone and be hurt by them simultaneously, when you think about the dilemma of children who love a parent but their parent could be their abuser, the conflict between being hurt and loving that person and loving the person who hurts you causes immense distress in children. So I think that any relationship where you care about somebody or love them and they hurt you is an incredibly internal, anxiety-provoking, conflict-inducing situation. The federal government is doing its best to address what we've called in the news an epidemic of murders and violence towards women. And statistically, there is more reported violence and more fatal outcomes between women and, I think, male partners. But I haven't got the exact statistics on that. So I think it's useful to begin somewhere. I too don't like the words combat. I don't like the words leave your partner. It's very difficult for people to leave their partner. Often they stay because they have children and they think about the children, forgetting sometimes that it can be more harmful for children to actually be in the violent, shouting, yelling, hurting, hitting family. And I think that we really should begin at grassroots. To me it's about education. I do not like the word toxic masculinity at all. I find that phrase reductive, and it doesn't talk about positive masculinity. It says masculinity and then with the word toxic. What do people take from that? What do young boys take from that? What do children take from that if they identify as male? I would prefer that we had a whole thing about what's positive masculinity, what's positive femininity, what's positive transgender, whatever it is, can we go for? What are the values and what is the best we're aiming for? Not just naming the bad bit, which has no context. So it's a phrase. So I think we're lazy.
Yeah, I agree. And I think language is really important, that we're using correct language, because language creates culture.
Yeah.
And we only have cultures for things that we have language for. And we make up these phrases and we put two words together and assume that when we put those two words together, they're prescriptive or descriptive of an actual thing, when they actually may not be. That thing may not exist. For instance, political correctness. They're two words that shouldn't go together. Military intelligence. Toxic masculinity. If it's toxic, it's not masculinity. Because, this language is very divisive.
Yes, but I think our whole world with algorithms, social media, what's happening is we're being divided. Yeah. And it's a very, very worrying strategy that shades of grey and discussion and differences of opinions and people debating without being cancelled or eradicated. What happened to us? When did we lose the capacity to hold different views, to have people disagree, to have a healthy discussion without it becoming so divisive and so inflammatory that I think we've lost critical thinking?
We have. I can't tell you exactly when it was, but I can tell you it was within my lifetime.
Yeah, mine too.
It hasn't always been this way.
No.
And people used to be able to have differences of opinions, and that was fine.
It was healthy.
Yeah, and you used to be able to insult somebody and they were okay with it. You know, I grew up with sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. But now if you mispronounce somebody, you've offended them and you can be, you know, sanctioned for that. I mean, we've just become a little bit brittle in our spirit and a bit too delicate and, you know, yeah, I just think that's a good question. Like, where are we going? Where are we heading? And the divisiveness is a real issue because a lot of the things that are showing up in our culture today are very divisive.
Yeah.
And like the government giving $5,000 for the woman to leave her partner, and it's not necessarily the woman, but that's how the media's put it. It might be the man who's being assaulted at home. Is he going to get the $5,000 as well? And is that the best strategy to break the family up or to break the relationship up? And any behaviour that you reward, you're going to get more of.
What do you mean, Pete?
So if you give $5,000 to someone and they leave, that could be construed of, someone will see that, if I just got to leave my partner and I'll get $5,000. You may create more divisiveness, more breakdown of the family unit because you're rewarding it. Wouldn't that $5,000 better be spent for that couple to go to a couples counsellor or therapist to work on their issues and their problems and learn conflict resolution strategies, for instance, rather than just, no, here's $5,000 to leave?
Pete, I think that's so much a contextual thing again and a prehistory thing. Because my understanding of the 5,000 was it was when it was dangerous and life and death. And I think that is a time to go. Mm-hmm. So it depends on that. When you say reward, that to me implies a behaviorism model. You know, good behaviour, bad behaviour, instead of this is an emergency fund for people who are at high risk. And that I'm in favour of, because people who are at high risk sometimes with their children need to get out.
Absolutely.
And in terms of money being spent for education, it should begin, in my view, this whole thing about how to be good partners, have good values, treat every human being and living being with respect and care, begins from conception. You know, the first, I think, 1,100 days of a baby's life, even before they have verbal memory, they have somatic memory. So little fetuses can jump around in your uterus because they hear shouting or they get a shock. So that's going to produce a little bit of adrenaline in that little fetus. And then when that baby is born, if there's shouting and, you know, tense atmospheres around, they're going to somatically experience that. And maybe then become hardwired or lay down neural pathways for anxiety. There are so many things that happen in those first 3 years of life before there's a capacity to have words to recall that memory, that money could be spent, if we had a lot of money, which I wish we did, to start right then and there, to support people who are pregnant, to support families in the early stages, to help people right from the beginning. and then have an education system that is supportive of teaching positive qualities, teaching positive communication, teaching positive masculinity, so that you get a culture that knows, okay, this is what it's good and to aim for, rather than suddenly arriving at this place called toxic masculinity. I mean, there's so much that could be done along the way before you have to acquire $5,000 to save your life.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about other ways they could spend that money in a moment, but I just wanted to maybe look at some of the statistics around domestic violence, and it depends on where you're getting the statistics from.
Yeah.
And if it's surveys done looking at domestic violence, you'll get one set of statistics. If it's crime statistics, it'll be a different set. And so I've looked at some of these statistics, and in terms of domestic violence, it's almost a 50-50 split between the man and the woman as who's doing the hitting.
That does not necessarily surprise me, because I've worked with men who've been perpetrated against with violence, and often they don't present at hospitals and they don't show up for treatment because they feel ashamed that somehow they're not a proper man, that they have been hurt or bruised. And I think it's a difficult place for them to go out and say, my partner's been abusing me. So I think that if we did more investigating, you'd find that there's a whole lot of stuff under the surface. I think the difficulty and the worry is that in terms of survival, women in domestic relationships, because of different levels of strength and physicality, are the ones who end up very badly injured or dead.
Yeah, I agree. So the crime statistics are heavily in favour of the men being the perpetrator and the women being the victim.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons for that is that a man is unlikely to report to the police that he's been hit by his female partner.
And that's true.
Yeah, but women are more likely to, and for all sorts of reasons.
And I want to just put a proviso in there.
Sure.
Women are more likely to recently, but they were not listened to. I don't know if you ever saw that wonderful show not so long ago where David Halpern was talking about domestic violence cases where the police would come to the door. I think it was on SBS. And the police would ask, the woman who's rung, what's going on. And the man would come to the door and persuade the police person that he or she has just, overreacted. And so there's also a thing where I think police that I know hate working with domestic violence or going to those calls out because they're dangerous. They don't know what they're going to find or if they're going to be attacked. And secondly, they haven't had the training around how to respond to these things in a way that picks it and can be supportive. It's getting better, but in terms of the crime statistics, it wasn't always the case that women even got hurt.
I don't know how long ago, it was probably 20 years ago or so. I remember that the police were outraged because they would get a call that there was domestic violence. They would go around. By the time they got there, the woman had changed her mind. Nobody got charged. Nothing happened. And the police were getting very, very frustrated about this. So they changed. I think they actually changed the law, and that if there is a call for domestic violence, that if they attend, that they have to charge somebody.
Yes, and often what happens is the police take out or make the charge, and then everyone wants to retract it later.
Yes.
And exactly because of that thing you were talking about earlier, the conflict of loving somebody who hurts you and feeling, well, it was just once, or what about the family, or what about the children, and is the whole more important than me? It's all those conflicting, unclear areas where you never know quite what the right way to move is.
This next question is probably quite complex and it's not going to be easy to answer, but what do you think are some of the underlying reasons for domestic violence, whether it's the man or the woman that's the perpetrator? What do you think's behind violence in the home? What are some of the root causes?
There's so many. You know, how was anger dealt with in their upbringing? How have they been role modelled to express or not express anger? When there is financial stress, substances involved, particularly alcohol, the Australian gold standard of every sporting event, that always turns off your frontal lobe, which makes better decisions, and out comes more instinctual, reactive, unthought out response. And then there's tiredness. Domestic violence generally, I reckon if they did, a timeline happens towards the end of the day in the evening where people are exhausted, they've got little bandwidth left. You add in poor communication skills or a reactive nature, or people who don't know how to recognise they're getting heated. They don't recognise that, you know, they're getting hot in the body and it's time to have a break. And they don't have the skills to regulate that. There's so many reasons that contribute to that. And then you've got to look at society, because that's got its part to play. There's family of origin history, there's society, you know, there's the way we deal with things in society, there's the amount of emphasis we put on certain things like sporting stars who seem lately to have been quite a lot in the press for not such good behaviour, and yet they're in heroic standard state because we love our sports people here, and I don't think we revere and treasure our academics or our artistic talented community in the same way as we do our sporting heroes. There's so many things at play in all of this.
Yeah, you named at least a dozen different factors, and I think they're all relevant. If I can pick a couple of those out. So you mentioned early childhood stuff and how you learned and what was modelled to you in terms of how you manage your anger or aggression or whatever. It's currently legal in all states in Australia to hit your children. That's not illegal. Yet, if you hit your spouse, that is illegal because your spouse can charge you with assault.
And you've got to think about who's more vulnerable.
Absolutely. And who
So
has
I'm
a
not
choice.
keen on that, Lord
nor
Peter.
am I. Nor am I. And I'd like to maybe just chat about that a little bit because
Let's do it.
Let's do it because I'm not keen on it either. And
No.
so here's the Prime Minister, you know, throwing around $1 billion of taxpayers' money, thinking that he has the solution. And I'm just concerned maybe he's not looking at the problem properly. And he's got the answers, but I don't think he's really asking the right questions. Why is it still legal in Australia for a grown adult person to belt a child? It's not just the parent, a caregiver.
I have no idea.
An adult caregiver can. So we need some law reform.
I want to
around that.
tell you, when I came to this country some decades ago, it was early 90s, and there was a Queensland judge who ruled in a case of a woman who had brought into her before the court that her husband had raped her in the marriage. And he said, quote unquote, there's no such thing as rape within a marriage, you know, and it was the goods and chattel model. And so why do we allow it to be legal for an adult to hit a child? I don't think that law should still be in practice.
Okay, I agree with you on that. And I wonder how many other people out there listening would agree with that. And maybe we could do a poll or a survey and to start with and find out how many people believe that it's okay to hit your children and that should be legal. And I'm wondering if maybe the majority of people think that law shouldn't be in place. And if it shouldn't, then maybe we should challenge that law.
I think so, but what I'd like to see if we challenge the law is we have things in place. Because, my experience of most parents, in fact, nearly all of them, they don't really hit their children out of malice and malevolence. Something happens, they get frustrated, they get frightened, they respond in an instinctive way or out of temper. Now, that's not a good thing and I don't condone it. But if we're going to say it's illegal, which it should be,
I agree.
what are we going to put in place to help people have better skills to recognise when they're stressed? And what's more, have support.
Well, if you gave me that $1 billion, I would create those programs.
Peter, you're the man for the job.
Well, I'm passionate about this because, I was belted as a child, from 5 to 15. Like for 10 years I was belted. And, looking back at that, I'm thinking, and so I'm going to ask you, this is, as a psychologist, do you think that there's a relationship between a parent belting a child when they're young and then that young boy growing up to belt his partner? Could there possibly be any correlation in that?
I think there could be a correlation, and I think there's a correlation in a lot that we're seeing. I remember being a little kid and being taken to see Bambi. And I was absolutely devastated when the mummy Bambi, the mother of Bambi, got killed by a hunter. I thought my parents had tortured me. And then at 16 or 17, I went to see The Deer Hunter. And I couldn't talk for 2 days. I was so shocked by, and moved by that film. Nowadays, with what we're exposed to in terms of the media and violence and news and footage and films, and when you think about kids on those games where there's, kill, 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 it's not that causes them to be violent, but it means they become more accustomed and inured to it. So I think that we've got to look at all of that. We seem to me to have lost our element of surprise and shock and to be less sensitive to things in many ways like that and more sensitive to some things like a pronoun being wrong.
Yeah.
However, I think the pronoun being wrong is a side or the top issue. What the person is often upset about is that the other person didn't take the time to ask. It's about our lack of curiosity and interest in the other.
So, I just want to pull it back a bit too. So, in a domestic couple, it's not okay for one partner to hit the other.
No.
But yet our government, not our government, because I can't blame the current government because that law's been around for a long time, the legislative body hasn't yet removed or made it illegal to hit a child. So you can't hit your partner, but you can hit your child.
It's a nonsense.
The partner is there voluntarily. The child doesn't have the same say in whether they're in that family or not. The partner's an adult size and can protect themselves more. It just doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever that it's illegal to hit your partner but legal to hit your child. And now, look, I was hit a lot as a child, and now that didn't make me a violent person.
No.
In fact, I've never hit anybody in anger in my life, and I hope that I can, continue that. So I'm not saying necessarily that being hit as a kid turns you into a violent person, but I'm certainly curious about the relationship between what are we teaching our children when we hit them? And so I think that the government would be better off addressing violence in the home between the parent and the child first before they tackle domestic violence. And if possibly, I'd like to see the results that if they made it illegal to hit your child in Australia and that there were sanctions so that if you did hit your child...
Combined with an education program.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. then would we see over time a decrease in domestic violence?
We could, as long as we had with that, this is a better way to respond. Here are some alternatives. These are strategies for when, as long as we skilled people up. Because when we just say it's illegal to hit your child, which I agree it should be, and you don't provide, okay, but we understand that sometimes X, Y, and Z, you get frustrated, you get this, you get that. So here are some things that you can do, and here are some ways of recognizing. I would like to see that equally, because it's like the toxic masculinity. What is positive masculinity? What are positive ways to parent? What are good ways to help children grow into healthy, people who value themselves and respect others and respect themselves?
So you're saying we need to give other strategies, and that those other strategies should be delivered as some form of education, or
from the beginning.
What do you think is the right forum for that education? Where should that education be being delivered?
I would like everyone who gets pregnant, was about to have a child, and their partner to go along and have compulsory. This is so autocratic, isn't it? But education and help, because I think it's quite a daunting time. It's a beautiful time being for most people. For some people it isn't, conceiving a child. And everybody I know wants to be the best parent they can. But sometimes they don't know what are useful things, and models change over the years. Dr. Spock's model compared to the attachment parenting now are worlds apart. And so society changes and things go in and out of fashion. But basic stuff like respect and kindness and care and sensitivity, they can never go out of fashion. Ooh, you'd have to ask my children that, and thank God they're not here to answer that. No.
You don't remember ever hearing
No, I don't. I remember once, actually, I was terrified. My son was about to run across the road, and I grabbed him harshly.
Yeah, sure.
Because I got such a fright. But I came from a family where corporal punishment was the way.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Oh, yes. So we were sent to our bedrooms while my mother got out her coat hanger, where we had to wait. The anticipation of it all. And I remember my dear father once smacked me and he cried.
I like that.
I didn't. So, yes, I think I did actually pull my son quite harshly once.
That was a protective thing, though.
Yeah, but I still think I wish I'd been equanimous and calm.
That's the Buddhist in you. So you were hit as a child by your parents with a coat hanger?
Oh, yes, and we had boarding schools where you had corporal punishment. It was the good old English standard of, spare the rod and spoil the child.
Yeah, I went to Christian Brothers College and I was copped beltings and punched and kicked and
slapped. And then you wonder what's in it for the Christian Brothers, don't you? That's a whole other chapter.
It's just an outlet for their aggression, I suppose.
Or their repressed sexuality,
yes,
which unfortunately sometimes they haven't repressed, but we won't go into that.
That's a whole other podcast, Jane. So you were hit as a child and you didn't hit your children. I was hit as a child. I think I'm unlikely to hit mine. So, but 2 points don't make a trend or anything. So I don't know whether...
No, but what you're actually pointing out is a discrepancy between a moral, ethical issue of why is it not okay to hit your partner, which it shouldn't be, but it is okay legally to hit your child. Like you would think that a little kid or little young one is more vulnerable. When you said that the partner's there by choice, they're often there in the beginning by choice, and they don't always anticipate how it's all going to go. So they may end up staying, as you know, with coercive control or fear or financial, not wanting to be homeless, or all the things that go on when people are thinking of separating. But it does seem weird, doesn't it, that it's illegal to damage your partner. Thank God it is. But you can legally hit your child as if you possess that child and have the right.
Yeah, on that point there, I'm going to push back a little bit against that because I see it a bit differently in terms
Tell
of
me.
in terms of the whether it's the male or the female. For me, it's not. This is not about the sex. It's about two people. So as adults, if you're in a relationship, for me, the way I see it, the way I choose to see it, is that you're there by choice. I get that there's coercive control. I get that there's financial constraints. I get there's all sorts of reasons and explanations as to why people stay in relationships that are violent. But I still think that the empowering way to see it is that if you're an adult and you're there by choice. You're a volunteer, not a victim.
I love that after years of therapy. However, I have worked with people who may have been in a relationship with quite a seductive and nasty. I hate the phrase these days because no one gets left anymore. It's the partner has to have been a narcissist. But I have seen people be slowly eroded and told no one will love you the way I love you. And the person eventually loses their sense of self and their sense of agency. So intellectually, your concept of choice makes perfect sense. But what happens to people inside is often they don't, after having, abuse or being told that no one will love them or being told that no one will put up with them or all of those things, they begin to think, well, maybe I deserve this. So they lose that sense of agency and the concept of choice becomes, I just feel defeated and nothing.
I do take your point on that. I've worked with some couples where one was a narcissist, but like a genuine narcissist.
We have to be careful these days.
And look, I'm not a clinical psychologist, so I can't diagnose, but they certainly had all the traits.
Yeah.
And the victim in a narcissistic relationship or the partner of someone who's with a narcissist, the gaslighting and the stonewalling and all the different strategies that they use is there to erode that person's sense of agency.
Yeah.
And I have seen it where that person is so broken that at that point, I agree, they don't have enough of themselves or agency or sovereignty to be able to make a conscious choice to stay or not stay. It's like they're in some state of paralysis.
They're in a hostage situation in some ways. And then you have to think sometimes they get so scared of leaving because they think they'll get killed. And guess what?
Some do.
Exactly.
Now the media and the government are wanting to showcase this as an epidemic of domestic violence in Australia. The statistics don't show that at all. And in fact, the 35-year trend since 1989 is downwards quite significantly. I think between 2022 and 2023, there was it went from 26 women murdered in the home to 32, and that was a 28% increase for that year. But you can't look at one isolated year, and that was also in the middle of, COVID, which was, and so, and another point I want to make is calling this gender-based violence, I think, is terrible terminology. A man doesn't hit his partner because she's a woman. Because men who are in gay relationships hit their partners, and lesbians hit their partners. And the statistics for domestic violence in lesbian relationships is the highest of all. You can look that up.
No.
Yeah.
I'm interested in that.
Yeah, and so it's not sex or gender based. And so calling it gender-based violence is more divisive language and making it, again, a toxic masculinity as this is an issue of men being bad, men being the perpetrators, and that we just need to fix the broken men, and it tends to make the women look like victims. And I think that's it. And when you mentioned in a case of a narcissist, so what I'm saying here is that there's a small cohort where it's a malevolent man with a woman who's in a victim state, hostage state, not wanting to be there, and the guy's just malevolent and nasty. But the vast majority of relationships aren't like that. 5% of men probably do 90% of the violence. So to say there's an epidemic, I think really paints a picture as though this is common or this is normal, that men are by nature violent towards their partners. Men are less likely to hit women than men. Yeah. So calling it gender-based violence is divisive language, unnecessary, and I think sneaky. If I was to hit my partner, it's not because she's a woman. It's because, I'm incompetent in regulating my emotions.
I think that's a good point, but Pete, what I think is that it's the death rate that has really got people, worried. There has been, is it once every 4 days or some horrible statistic that a woman is killed in a violent related incident with a partner?
I think this year there's been an inordinate rise. I think we've already had the usual annual average of women murdered by May 1st. So in 5 months.
But even say the annual average, it's like it's the annual rainfall. It's disturbing.
Well, there should be none. I agree that the ideal number would be 0, but that's certainly what we ought to be working towards. And the conversation we're having today is about what's the best way to work
You're
towards
upset
0.
about the languaging.
Well, I'm upset about a lot of things, but some of it's the language. Yeah. Some of it's the language. When you showed up here today, I'm like, "How you going, Jane?" And you used an expletive to describe how you're going. I said, "What's going on?" And you said, "It's the world." And so you're upset about a lot of things too. And
I am.
I think everybody's upset about a lot of things.
I agree.
Yeah, and so one of the things I'm looking at is that I don't like the government and the mainstream media splashing over the news, epidemic of gender-based violence, and portraying this as toxic masculinity. I was at Byron Bay down at the beach with my partner only a couple of weeks ago, about 5 p.m. It was a lovely evening, families everywhere, and there were 8 women marching in a line, and they had placards up and waving flags, and it was protesting domestic violence. And these women were shouting out things like, "You're murdering us, you're murdering us." And
how did you feel, Pete?
I'm going to tell you in a moment. And then another woman was going, where are the men that are going to join this march? Why aren't the men joining this march? And I'm looking at this and I'm seeing 8 women who seem to be very angry towards men, are accusing men of murdering, and some men are murdering some women, but this woman is saying, "You're murdering us." I mean, I know she's talking about women, but she's still alive. No, she has not been murdered. She's protesting on behalf of other people. And where are the men who are going to come and join this? And I felt like there's no way I would join you. Not if you're man-hating. Not if you're going to portray this as men are the problem and men won't come and join because men are cowards. The whole tone of it was not helpful. It was divisive. That's not the way to go about it.
What would you like to have seen instead?
In that protest?
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question. I definitely not that. I don't know how you protest.
It's
that.
interesting because I have had some I see a lot of men in my practice, all of whom I think are delightful, actually. But some of them have cried and said, we feel so awful about, being men because of what's portrayed in the media. They feel guilt. They feel guilt and shame for what's happening to women. And I know that some white Australians feel guilt and shame for what happened to, and is still unfortunately happening in our racist place, to First Nations people. And I think we have to work out, how do we repair and how do we turn this into something that is better for everyone?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I don't think using divisive language helps.
I agree. I'd like to see united language. I'd like to see discussion and debate. I'd like to see shades of grey. I hate lazy phrases like toxic masculinity. I would like to see like an affirming, this is what we can do, this is what we are doing. Do you remember those ads, Pete, when you and I were working at the sanctuary, or before that, the drink driving, drug taking ads where if you had one joint, you were going to end up psychotic and mad. And if you took ice, you were going to end up with no teeth and literally go green. Those were scare campaigns.
Yeah.
And I think they actually turned people more away and more into, I think we'll just go and have an experiment. This is all a bit extreme. So in the way we're going about this now, we haven't gone for positive messaging, positive education. Scare campaigns don't work unless you're John Howard and it's the Tampa crisis and you're about to have an election. Right. Then it does. But generally, people just go, oh yeah, here we go again, exaggerated bull. I think if we had, this is what you can do, people want to know, how can we be better? How can we do this differently? How can we communicate in a much more responsive and reasonable way? People need that messaging, not negativity. We have to say this is what's going on and this is what we need to do and this is how we do it.
Yeah, so another point that I want to bring up is that I agree with you. It's men do feel shame and guilt.
Yeah.
And because we are bigger and stronger than women, and we know that we can cause damage, if we were unable to regulate our emotions, and so I've never done that. I've never hit a woman, nor do I believe I ever would. But if I did, I would feel deep guilt and shame. Women are every bit as aggressive as men. I mean, that's not disputable. That's been measured. But women have a different way of expressing their aggression. Women are less likely to punch on. Men are, and men know that about other men, and so men have developed ways to sort things out. But if they can't sort it out, they will punch on. Generally, men are less likely to hit women. Women are also less likely to hit, but a lot do. But if a woman wants to get back at a man, she has ways of doing that don't involve physical violence. And some of those ways can be every bit as hurtful as physical violence. And I just want to read a quote, if it's here. This is from a guy called Murray Strauss. He was an American sociologist, and he invented something called the conflict tactics scale, which was the most widely used instrument in research on family violence.
Right.
And he has this quote here in one of his books. Let me just check this and read this out. Physical assaults are not necessarily the most damaging type of abuse. One can hurt a partner deeply, even drive them to suicide without ever lifting a finger. Verbal aggression can be even more damaging than physical attacks. And if you look at the suicide statistics in Australia, about over 3,000 people suicide in Australia a year. 75% of those are male.
Yeah, they've got a horribly high.
Yeah, I think if anything, we have an epidemic of male suicide rather than an epidemic.
We do have an epidemic of that.
Yeah, and I think, one of the reasons men kill themselves is through relationship breakdown.
Yeah.
So I think men are more likely to turn the violence on themselves in a domestic situation that's failed rather than on the woman. However, there are malevolent, nasty types of men who are more likely to externalise that violence. And so I would say that more men kill themselves than kill their female partners in a domestic relationship that's gone bad.
And men often end their lives when they feel they failed their family. Yeah. They feel they can't provide. They feel they've let everyone down. They feel the family would be better off without them. Right. And they carry that responsibility sometimes of being provider and protector to the point where, when they've lost their job or they're losing money or they can't put literally food on the table, they feel that they're useless, that their life is pointless. And so it's often, risk factors for men when they're going to suicide involve often when they feel like they can't fulfill their role in the way that they think they have to.
And that demonstrates the real nature of positive masculinity, because good men see their role as providing for and protecting their family, their usually female partner and their children. And so when they can't do that, they feel deeply wounded, like you say, and they feel like the family's better off without them, which I think shows what men are really up to and what men are really about. And I think to portray men as, malevolent and nasty and toxic rather than providing and protecting, it's just more divisive and unhelpful.
I think that we've got to be careful of gender there, because I'm the provider in my family and have been for 30 years. And for me, if I couldn't support and feed my family, I would feel bloody useless too, because that's been my role.
Okay, sure.
And so I think it's the roles we take and the weight and responsibility in which we carry them. Because when you have people depending on you, whether you're a mother with children, a breadwinner, whatever, you never want to let people down. Think about small business owners. They never want to get rid of staff, but if they can't afford economically to keep them, it's angst. The amount of people that I've seen who've had to let staff go in tough economic times and lost sleep over it because they're worried about the flow-on effects. Most people do not like to ever let another person down. So I think it's about roles and not necessarily gender.
Yeah, I'd say in the majority of cases, the man's the provider.
Well, I haven't found one, Peter.
You haven't?
Can you rustle one up?
You're a very high-functioning woman, Jane. Maybe you co-created that situation.
I think I did. And probably wouldn't want to change it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's different. People have different.
Yeah, I like being able to do that. Yeah.
I get
but I would feel bad if I let the people dependent on me down.
Sure. Yep. As a man can and do. I just want to recount a couple of, I guess I call them case studies from people that I've worked with as a coach or a counsellor.
Yeah.
And so there was one particular young woman came to me one time and said that she was in a domestic violence situation. And so I said, well, look, yeah, sure, tell me all about it. Give me all the details and the background. And so she spent about a good 90 minutes in which I didn't interrupt not once, because I wanted to get all the information. And she basically portrayed the situation she in was that her male partner was an absolute monster and that she was this innocent, victim. And as I was listening, it was just there was something quite incongruent about how she reported things, and that he would hit her and put his hands around her throat, and that she felt scared and threatened, and that this had been going on for a while, but at other times he was, supportive and caring, and there was no alcohol involved.
Yeah.
And as she went on, I'm like, this is not adding up. And so at the end of her 90 minutes or so, I said, look, thank you for that. That gives me a lot of information. I just have some questions for you. Because what you're painting is a picture of a horrible man who's very violent, and you there as an innocent victim. I said, is there anything that you can take responsibility for? Now, it's funny because I've told stories like this to people before, and the moment I say that, they go, oh, you're victim blaming. I'm not blaming anybody. I'm using the word responsibility. And this is something else, that when I'm working with my clients, I tell them to throw blame and fault out. Blame and fault is useless language. I don't use it. Whatever we have language for, we have a culture for. So if we've got a language for blame and fault, we're going to have a culture of that. So we'll blame the men. It's the men that are at fault. So throw out fault and blame, and if you replace it with responsibility, then you make inquiries as to what each party can be responsible for. If the man's got his hands around her throat, he's responsible for that. And if she's doing anything to provoke anything from him, she's responsible for that. So I asked her what she could be responsible for, and we went down that line of inquiry, and at one point I asked her who hit who first. And it was like a light lit up inside her head. And she's like, for the first time she saw it, because I think that was in her shadow. She said, oh, I think I hit him first. And she was petite. She was like 4'11", probably weighed, 100 pounds.
As much as my left leg.
Yes, right. and so she hit him first. And I said, okay, so I really appreciate you disclosing that and your honesty and transparency around that. I'm like, so you can be responsible for hitting him first. What do you think that message conveyed to him? Do you think it possibly could have conveyed that violence is an acceptable form of communication in our relationship? Or what else could he make of that? You did hit him first, and then now he's hit you back, and you're not happy about it. And nor should you be, because, people hitting people is not ideal. But then I kind of pursued my line of questioning a bit further, and I said, I get what he's like, because you've really described him as a monster. I want to look for your monster, because I believe we all have one in us. I mean, I'm fascinated by Jung's concept of the shadow, and I think we all have a monster in us. Some of us are less likely to want to admit that. So I went looking for her monster, and I said, what are you like on a bad day? Like, what can you be like when you're just at your wit's end and he's really pissing you off and you really want to get back at him? Like, what can you do and how can you be? And to her credit, she goes, oh, I can be a right. And she used the C word. And I thought, that's enlightening. I said, what do you mean by that? And she goes, I know exactly what to say to cut him down at the knees. And so when women want to be, quote unquote, violent with their men, they don't hit them often, although she had also done that. They'll use character assassination. They'll go after a man in a way to really hurt him, to demean him, to disrespect him, to bring him down, to erode his honour. And men are susceptible to this kind of thing. Mm. Yeah, and so I was just asking her, what I was doing was saying, can you see how you are partially responsible for what's showing up in the relationship? And to her credit, she took some of that on, and she goes, I can see how I've contributed to this. I says, well, yeah, maybe you could take some responsibility for that, and maybe things will be different. We only ever had the one session, and, she didn't come back for another session. I don't know how things worked out, but that was my line of inquiry. And I've had many couples who I've worked with like that, where I'm looking for what can each party be responsible for. Now, if it's the man and he's responsible for hitting the woman, I'll hold him to account fully for that. and I'll tell him to take responsibility for that and the impact of his actions. So where we're at now in our current culture is there's blame and fault, and that's not working. We want to look at what each party can be responsible for. I think that's a much better inquiry.
I think you're talking about the intersubjective field between people.
Can you explain what you mean?
Well, when you have two people, you have a dynamic, because everybody has their bit that they add into the dynamic. So you were commenting on the woman saying, I know exactly what to say to cut him off at the knees. And again, I think let's get out of gender, because I hear men say, I know if I tell her she looks fat or she's got cellulite, or, I know just how to make her feel small. And it's like, that is the thing that we have to look at, about how we hurt one another in areas of vulnerability, because it gives us power, or we one up, or we knock the wind out of someone's sails. Why do we need to do that? What's going on in us that we have to erode another in order to feel better about ourselves? And perhaps that's that Jungian shadow side that you're talking about, the disowned aspects of the self, where we're all capable of doing things to other people with the knowledge that we might have of their vulnerable aspects that are hurtful, because in that moment we feel less adequate, or we don't like feeling that that person is in a great mood if we're in a shitty mood. We all do that dance sometimes, somewhere in our lives.
Yeah, I was sharing with you earlier that, I've been working as a trauma therapist for 12 years, and now I'm working much more doing shadow work, educating people about shadow work. And the reason shadow works became my new passion is because through listening to tens of thousands of hours of people's trauma, I saw the cycle of trauma, and I saw people just keep hurting people. And like you just said, then my inquiry was, what's going on in us? And, it occurred to me that it's the unintegrated shadow, it's the monster, the disowned parts of self in me that I haven't integrated.
I don't like the word monster, because we have bits of ourselves that we think, I don't really like that bit. But it's us.
Yeah.
It's who we are too.
Yeah. Look, if you look at all our stories, Jane, all our, starting from young, fairy tales and stories we tell our children, they've got monsters in them. There's a reason for that. If you look at all our myths, even our adult stories, Hollywood, Marvel, superhero, it's all the hero's story. And every hero story, there's archetypes. And so every hero story has a hero and a villain. They're both you.
Exactly.
You're the hero and the villain.
And owning up to our villainous aspects.
Yeah, and that's the part. That was the inquiry when I was asking that woman, because she was painting the guy as a villain. I'm like, well, what about your villain? Are you willing to take responsibility for your villain? And that's a good inquiry. And so, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I think where we ought to be going with this is if people were willing to look at that part of themselves. So if you're in a domestic violent relationship and you just want to blame, whether you're a male or a female, and you want to blame your partner, I suggest maybe throw blame and fault out and look for what can you take responsibility for. Is there part of you that's a villain that you can't see? Now, people aren't going to see it because it's in their blind spot, it's shadowed by nature. And how do we educate people to even go there and look for that part in themselves? So Jung came up with the concept of shadow, I think, in like 1950, 1960.
Yeah.
Right. He came up with that term and pointed to the unknown parts of self. If you look at our art for thousands of years,
it's shown
shadow
that.
is in there.
Yeah.
So because art speaks to our unconscious mind. So I think we need to wake up to the villain in us, and that I think that's part of the conversation around domestic violence, because There's no point. It's not about gender, as you've said, and I've said too. It's not gender. It's
except
not sex.
for the
imbalance in terms of
death.
impact. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, there is an imbalance.
And that's the dangerous bit.
And that unfortunately we can't do much about.
Well, you know what? I have young men who are built like, I can only use the phrase brick shithouses.
That's fine.
And one punch from them and it's a king hit. And I have had to say to them, even if you're provoked because of your muscle power, you must walk away. Because if you do that, no matter how you're provoked, you will end up in big trouble. They have such a muscle ratio that they're a weapon.
I agree.
And I'm protecting them actually by saying, do not go down that. And I think we have to remind men that don't go down that path because of that ratio. And I think we have to talk to people about how can we, I have seen couples. I say, never have a difficult conversation at night. You're too tired and you're just going to get pissed off and go to bed annoyed, have a bad night's sleep, and then the cycle will begin in the morning.
Yeah, good advice.
Wait 48 hours. Let it percolate. Make a time, if it's important, to chat to your partner. If you really want to have a conversation that's worthwhile, because then the two of you will be in that problem-solving mood. And on that note, in the old days when MDMA was legal for the couple counselling, that was used because couples could feel love and care and connected while they were on MDMA and they had a therapist with them and say really difficult things, but the person felt the love. So they resolved a hell of a lot of stuff in those moments because they were having the good feelings while talking about the difficult things. And I wish that people realized if you want a valuable conversation, when you want to really resolve something, don't do it at 7 o'clock at night. If it's important, shelve it and then have it if you can.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. That's very good advice. And what I'm hearing in this conversation is maybe it's easiest solution than we think. Maybe men and women just need better strategies, or people need better strategies for how to resolve conflict, for how to handle confrontation well, to know when to have those difficult conversations and when not to. I mean, me and my partner, we've had some, conflict and some arguments here and there, and
you're human.
Yeah,
you're in a relationship.
Yeah, and
it's going to happen.
I've never once thought of hitting her, but
I have thought of smothering my partner.
Have you? Okay.
But I've resisted.
Yes, we all have those fantasies, and my partner would sometimes want to have the difficult conversations at night, and I remember saying to her, not when I'm tired, it's like it's not going to go well because I'm not operating at my best. And over time, we learned not to do that.
Yeah.
And so me and my partner have got pretty good conflict resolution skills. But I've learnt those. She has them naturally, but I've had to learn them because I grew up in chaos and conflict and wasn't taught how to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've spent a lot of my time learning communication skills and that kind of thing. And so, with those skills, I mean, our relationship's now is, wonderful and non-violent and very caring and compassionate and all the rest. So maybe some of these people that are in these difficult relationships don't have the skills to manage their emotions well and become dysregulated.
I don't think they do, because I don't think people actually want to behave like that.
They don't want to behave like that?
No.
No, they don't. If they knew better, they wouldn't.
No, and do you remember... I know this sounds like a strange analogy, but the Portuguese model of treating addiction, where they've legalized everything and then they help people get better and find jobs, and the crime rate and the return to drugs is really very low since this has all happened. And imagine if we had conversations that said, look, sometimes your partner's going to drive you mad and you will want to lash out and react. These are normal feelings. But here are some ideas for you. Instead of shaming, blaming, naming, you said, look, we all have these feelings. You're not abnormal. But these are things you can do when you feel inadequate, or you feel jealous, or you feel less than, or you feel threatened, because this is common. This is the human experience.
It is, yeah.
And we talked about that, and everybody felt, we can get help without feeling like we're bad. Because, people attend domestic violence, and I know there's men's anger groups that run. But people often feel ashamed that they're going to them, because it's like, I've got something wrong with me. Or they have an addiction and they don't want to say they go to NA or AA, because we have this model that we're supposed to be absolutely all got our shit together 100% of the time. Welcome to neoliberalism. Whereas we're vulnerable, we have bad days, we mess up, we are human. I read this lovely quote somewhere about, I think it was Leonard Cohen, talking about what really is the hero's journey. And he said, and he have said it far more eloquently than I am, that it really isn't about being the hero who conquers everything. It's realizing that life's going to conquer you, that you're not going to be everything you thought you were going to be, that you're going to end up broken and tattered at times, and that just being around and still being kind and still being here, that's the heroic bit. And if we could all accept that we're all, my favourite quote from a friend, shepherding each other's home, and be able to talk about these difficult things and the stuff that we get up to as human beings, rather than presenting on Insta and my generation, Facebook, this perfect, unreal life, and got real about stuff. It would be far easier for people to put their hand up and say, look, I'm struggling with my temper.
I work with couples who come to me in conflict, and sometimes there's, fighting, arguing, even violence going on in there. And working with them, I used to do counselling and therapy, and I'm much more into using a coaching model now, because if you look at counselling and therapy, the approach tends to be going back and looking at historical things in the past and focusing on the upsets and the emotions about that. And, you can get bogged down in that. And when I get a couple come to me, I'm like, well, where are you now and where would you like to be? And then I use a coaching thing, and I see my role as a coach is to get them from A to B. Just like a bus is a coach. I'm a coach. I'm like a vehicle to get them from here to there. And so I look at what's not working in their relationship, and we break down what's not working.
And what is working.
And what is working. Exactly.
You want to expand that bit.
Absolutely.
And minimize the other.
Exactly. And they get, most my clients get pretty good results, because some of the material I got's real good, and it's all like conflict resolution, boundaries, agreements, negotiating for your needs, and all that kind of stuff. And so maybe the solution, some of the solution, obviously one part of the solution for this is, if couples are in distress, to go out and seek help from a professional person, a counsellor, a coach, a psychologist, men's group, women's group. If you can get in. If you can afford it. If it's available, great. Well, maybe that $1 billion could go towards making it affordable and available.
Or programs that start off and have, in the beginning when you're born, and this is for parents, and this bit's for primary school kids, and this bit's for adolescents, and this bit's for the 20-year-old who's trying to find themselves. Maybe we could have a whole lot of stuff people could access in a clear way about how to handle life and anger and emotions, and how to help engender that through the lifespan.
When you say programs, for me it's all about where does this education happen? Does it happen in the home? Does it happen in the school, in the classroom?
It should be happening everywhere.
Right.
The whole world.
Okay, well, we probably could look at winding up.
Yeah.
I think we've covered quite a lot of ground. you're a therapist working in the Byron Bay area.
Yeah.
So maybe, I don't know, maybe your books are full, but I was just thinking that if people like, I find you very grounded in reality and direct and supportive, and you've got good ideas, and there may be someone listening who may, want to come and see you because they think they like the sound of or the way you think. How could someone find you if they were looking for you?
Look, I work at a place called Medita, and if you look up the website Medita Holistic Collective, you will see there's myself and a number of psychologists and psychotherapists and a wonderful DBT nurse who teaches affect regulation and an OT that does vagal nerve release and stimulation. My books are full, but there are some really wonderful people I work with. And when people ring, even if we haven't got the right person there, and I think so-and-so from the clinic up at Bangalow or the bulk billing person here, I will try and find, with the help of the beloved Megan who does this with me, the right person, if our place doesn't have that.
Yeah. I know a couple of people who work at Medita Clinic with you, and I certainly refer clients your way, and because
Thank you.
You've got some very good people there working with you.
We have.
Yeah. I want to go back just to one comment because I don't want to let it slip, because you mentioned MDMA.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I wish people would use it in couple therapy.
Well, the good thing is that there's some moves being made currently with clinical trials and so forth going on to see. It's so slow. It just frustrates me how slow this stuff is. I mean, Rick Doblin's been working on it for 35 years in the US, and veterans.
And it was once legal.
Oh, yeah, which is outrageous. Then became illegal. And I know they're doing the work here now to get it legal, but God, if they could just speed that up. And it is wonderful. One of the things it does is, and particularly in couples therapy, is it does quite a few things. It does flood the brain with serotonin, which is like the feel-good neurotransmitter. But
and
also
it turns off your amygdala.
It does, which is your threat detection center.
Exactly.
So you're not in a state of alarm or panic, and so then you can resolve issues without getting into, I'm under threat here, I need to defend myself. So in couples therapy with MDMA, each party's way less defended. In fact, they're undefended.
They're full of good feelings for each other.
And it also releases oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone.
Yeah.
So MDMA, I mean, unfortunately, it's not available in Australia at the moment for couples. But maybe that's where the government could be putting that $1 billion into research grants for MDMA. So currently it's MDMA for PTSD. There's a trial going on in the Northern Rivers at the moment, or it's not going on. They're designing the clinical trial now, but the funding's come through for flood victims.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's hopefully going to be happening in the next couple of years. If only these things worked at the pace that I would like to see them work, then MDMA would already be available for couples who are in distress, so that they would learn how to resolve their conflicts and develop new strategies for getting along. There's a quote I once heard: "Violence is the last resort of the incompetent." And maybe if we were more competent, we wouldn't resort to violence. And maybe some of the ways we can do that, you could go and see a therapist or a coach or a counsellor or somebody to help you get the strategies to manage yourself when you're upset or angry or frustrated or scared, and learn some skills in how to get along, and just wait for the day when MDMA is available. And then
yes, I think we need a variety of things on offer, because there will be some people that aren't suitable for MDMA. So I just want to say, I wish it was a universal panacea, but it won't be. There will be people with physiological conditions that it's not suitable for, or who have histories which mean that they're more vulnerable, etc., etc. But amongst the many things that I wish were on offer, that is one of them.
Yeah, and then I'll throw out my offering, which I think is also useful, which is shadow work.
Yeah.
Yeah, which doesn't involve any medicine at all. It's just
and getting in touch with the side of yourself that you don't want to acknowledge, but it's there.
Yeah, and like MDMA, shadow work's not for everybody.
No.
Certain vulnerable personality types it would probably be a bit difficult for.
Yeah.
But for most people, shadow work is a good way to, you don't like that word monster, but get in touch with the villain in you.
Get in touch with the bits that you don't particularly want to know exist.
Yeah, and then if you get in touch with them and learn to embrace them and love them and take ownership and responsibility for them.
And then manage them.
And manage them and not project them onto others. I think that's a good place to wind up.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. That was a very interesting and diverse conversation. I think we covered a lot of things.
We just bounce around like a ping pong, like a pinball. And I have a brief and I never follow it. I just...
You never did follow rules.
No, I don't. I'm not good for following the rules. I've got oppositional defiance disorder, a bad case of it.
Not treatable.
Untreatable, refractory.
All right. Look, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Great. I hope maybe you come back on one day.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Jane.
Bye.